Hello and welcome to the June 1st podcast. My name's Ethan Moriarty, and I want to thank you very much for tuning into the podcast. Right off the bat, I want to hit you with a couple of places you can find more June 1st content. You can go to our website, www.junefirstweather.com. In all of these cases, the first is spelt out F-I-R-S-T. You can go to YouTube and type in June 1st. We should be the first channel result, the little black and white tornado. You can't miss it. And then Twitter, you can follow June 1st at June 1st WX. And then my personal handle on Twitter at eMoriartyWX. And with that, Peter Forister is a nature photographer and storm chaser based out of Virginia. Peter, welcome aboard.
Hey, thank you.
All right, now first, right off the bat, I want to ask you is, what are your thoughts upcoming for this coming Monday in terms of the snow that we are forecasted to get along the East Coast here?
Yeah, this forecast is about as tough as it gets for at least mid-Atlantic winter storms. And it's just been a few days of tracking with the models and trying to figure out where the warm nose is going to set up and what time the mixing starts. And it's just a mess. Just the worst kind of winter forecasting, about as hard as it can get. So,
yeah, I'm not much of a winter forecaster, but I like to, get into the snow maps and stuff like that, like everybody else. And as someone that goes out and documents snowfall events, particularly in the southern Appalachia area and Virginia and the Tennessee region, if I'm not mistaken, what do you do to kind of prepare yourself to go into those kind of situations?
Sure. So the forecast for, I'd say the general public is very different than the forecast for a storm chase per se when it comes to winter conditions. So when it comes to chasing these storms, it's really trying to pinpoint a specific location that you can get the best winter storm conditions. And you're usually looking for wind and big snowfall rates or urban impacts or something along those lines. But safety is a huge factor. It's honestly the most important element when it comes to these winter storms, because a lot of the time when you get to a spot and then it snows 12, 20 inches, whatever it is, you can't leave for sometimes a day, 2 days. And like this fiasco on I-95 just a couple weeks ago here in Virginia, where people were sitting there for 48 hours. So that's something that I want to avoid at all costs. So forecasting for clear roads, where are the plows going to be prioritizing through the duration of the event, which roads can I drive down safely if they're not plowed, all of those things kind of go into selecting a location for chasing these winter storms. And I'll tell you, for this last one, I went down to the Tennessee, North Carolina border at about 6,000 feet in elevation, on Roan Mountain, which is just a great spot for even non-weather stuff. It's awesome for hiking, but there's a major highway that goes right over the top of the mountain. And I was like, okay, I'm going to be stuck here for 24 hours, but I know the plows are going to come through. I know that I have all the gear in my car, extra day worth of food, extra day worth of water, all of this stuff. So go and sit there, and it went exactly as planned, which is always really great. So for this upcoming storm, different strategy. I'm going to try to stay in a larger city area to get some of the urban impacts, and cities are just a safer bet in general because of the plows and other video impact stuff you can get. So
yeah, that's something that I've never really considered before in terms of just plow routes and what is going to be, the first, obviously metro areas are going to be the first places that are really going to get the best snow road treatment. Right. And then the further out you radiate from that, it's going to be the main roads. And then you can probably find yourself in a real sticky situation if you kind of miscalculate, I guess you could say. And amazing to kind of see the poor timing of the event that took place last week with I-95 in Virginia with, multiple inch rates over rush hour traffic. Not exactly.
Yeah, it was just horrible timing. I feel so bad for those people. You'd think that the interstate would be the priority, but there was, miscommunications along the way, and I mean, forecasters did really awesome for this event, and VDOT worked their butts off to get the roads clear. So it was just a combination of unfortunate events that led to that. But
Yeah, I can imagine. I can't imagine. I mean, I was seeing some of the stories coming out of it, and like, I remember one. It was like a bread truck, and people were like, "Hey, you want to fire up the oven?" And they were just making bread in the middle of the highway because they had nowhere else to go. So it's like,
I'll tell you, these storm events where people don't have power for days and days, and kind of get stuck just in the neighborhood or whatever. I have heard lots of awesome stories just from around my town or around the state of people helping each other out. So, I mean, it's horrible that people have to go through this stuff, but it also brings out the best in people, and I really love to see that.
yeah. Now in your vehicle, if I'm not mistaken, you drive a Subaru.
I
You got
do.
the hatchback, uh, Forester, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Conveniently enough. And
Yeah.
do you usually have some sort of sleeping setup in the event that, if you do get stranded, you can kind of just fold down the back seats and hunker down if you need to?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a full portable mattress that I have folded up in the back, and I'll just put my back seats down and sleep in there with my 0-degree rated sleeping bag, and I've got a whole setup of blankets and like special window covers. And I've spent many nights in winter storms in the back of my Subaru. It's a great little setup. It lets me be mobile wherever I need to go, in the mountains, or sometimes a hotel doesn't work out, or sometimes I just can't afford a hotel. So back of the car is all. It's not the most comfortable setup in the world, but it does the trick for a night.
Yeah, for sure. Uh, Going back a little bit, so what was kind of the catalyst for getting you into meteorology? Was it, some sort of big event, or was it something that's just kind of stuck with you your entire life?
So yeah, meteorology for me has been an entire life thing. I was born with it, and part of that I can thank my parents. My mom and dad both tell stories of sitting me down on a hotel bed or something and making me watch Jim Cantori when I was 5 years old. And so honestly, as long as I can remember, I've loved the weather, and loved engaging with meteorologists. But I grew up in Colorado Springs. Was where I did middle school, a lot of high school, and really the thing that got me there was watching the storms go up over the plains. So I had Pikes Peak out one direction out my back porch, and then I look the other direction. You can see the towers going up over Kansas at sunset, and that was just wonderful. And severe storm season was always my favorite in Colorado, just to watch them and hope that I would get hailed on a little bit, hope that I would see the big lightning. And yeah, from there, just kept falling in love and started digging myself into the science. And
Yeah, that's awesome. Particularly, that's an amazing part of the country to be in, to kind of grow that fascination. Uh, it was my first time this summer in Colorado, and driving up that I-25,
that's right. Yeah.
yeah, I-25 corridor. It's amazing to see the stark difference between the Front Range and the plains. You're driving north on I-25, for example, and you got the flattest of plains to your east, and then you've got mountains shooting up to 14,000 feet to your west, and it's such a amazing geography and storm machine, especially off that Palmer Divide that Colorado Springs pretty much shits right in.
That's exactly right. And I actually lived basically at the top of the Palmer Divide for several years. And let me tell you, they get blizzards up there, big time blizzards, sometimes combined with the Chinook winds or the phone winds. And I mean, I remember days where we had 90 to 100 mile an hour winds, and then a few days later we'd get like snow drifts that I could sled off my roof, just straight into the snow drifts. And it was so much fun. The Palmer Divide is an amazing place.
Yeah. Uh, since moving to Virginia and taking up storm chasing as a hobby, I guess you could say, did that start in Colorado, or did that kind of occur a little bit later in life?
So the storm chasing itself didn't really start until after I had my driver's license, which was beginning of high school. I think that's typical for most people. But I was in Virginia by that point, so I started storm chasing just around my county in Northern Virginia. and kind of taught myself as I went. Started in just a few roads around my house. I would, when a big squall line came through, I'd run out to a field and take pictures there. But then, as the years progressed, I started expanding my circle until I kind of came to Central Virginia, and now I can cover all the way from Pennsylvania to the Carolinas on an average chase day, and I'll go all over the country otherwise.
That's awesome. Uh, I kind of had a similar situation here in Western Massachusetts where, my first year, first getting my license, kind of just within the county borders, I guess you could say, and then slowly
Exactly.
growing that radius over time. And I feel like that's a good place for most people to start that are looking to get into this. Uh, Particularly that an issue that you and I both run into being East Coast natives and in the heart of Appalachia, trees and terrain are something that are kind of, maybe we could say, the bane of our existence when it comes to viewing
Yes.
storms. So, what are some strategies that you have when it comes to kind of navigating terrain when you're local chasing in Virginia or just in general along Appalachia?
Sure, I can go really deep into this. This is
Oh,
my
let's
bread and
do it
butter.
then.
Yeah. So I'm sure, as up in Massachusetts, that first of all, there's trees, but you have to deal with that pretty much anywhere east of like central Kansas,
Yeah.
honestly. But then the terrain is really the mixer here. And I live in an area called the Piedmont, and that just means foothills. And it's the foothills up to the Blue Ridge Mountains. And the Blue Ridge Mountains are an amazing focal point for storm development. So the terrain actually helps me here in Central Virginia a lot. It's similar to the way the Front Range operates, and you get a lee trough sometimes with big storm systems out west. It works on exactly the same process, just a
Hmm.
smaller scale here in Central Virginia. So I'll use that to my advantage almost every single severe setup, unless it's a tropical system or something. And I'll park myself in front of the big terrain in a spot where I can see it and wait for the terrain to do its magic and let the storms come to me. It's a super effective strategy, and people always say in Virginia that there's like a supercell alley per se in Charlottesville and Lynchburg and these areas that I frequent a lot, and it's really because of this lee trough combination off the Blue Ridge Mountains. So it's really been interesting to kind of discover that, because um, there is very little published academic research about lee troughing in the Appalachians. There are like one or two papers by grad students that have kind of looked at it, but otherwise it's not very well studied. And this was kind of a thing we figured out through local observations and talking to the meteorologists who know the area really well, and all of that, and obviously personal experience. So after the storms have kind of fired up on the terrain, they'll move out, and there's a corridor of farmland here in Virginia in the Piedmont, and it's just wide open fields. It's wonderful. There are parts of it that feel like Kansas, just so wide open, and chasing is really easy there. But then you go further east towards the I-95 corridor, and it starts to get more typical big pine forests and um, narrow roads going up and down little hills, and it's like a tunnel of trees kind of a thing. And that's not a particularly fun area to chase. But my general strategy for chasing that is I spend a lot of time on maps, on Google Maps, especially before events. I'll kind of figure out where my target area is, where I expect the storms to form, and where I expect them to track, and just study the roads, study on visible satellite where there are open fields. And sometimes I have a whole um, Google Maps like document. You can save maps on Google Maps,
Yep.
and I have points
Yep. Same.
all over the state of fields that I can drive to, and I know that I'll have a view at that location. So it's almost bunny hopping from one viewpoint to another. And I'm like, okay, the storm is tracking to the northeast at however 30 knots or whatever, and I know it takes me 20 minutes to get to the next field. So I drive to that field instead of per se chasing the storm, and then let it come to me that way. So yeah, on a general storm chase day, it's a lot of time just driving in the trees, and then you get this 5-minute window of parking at your favorite field or whatever it is. And I'm sure you're familiar with a similar chase
Yeah.
strategy up in New England.
This is yeah, by it's funny how many parallels we have to change our chase strategies because it literally comes down to finding those open fields and utilizing them to the best of your advantage. And what I started doing this about last year in my Google Maps folder of chase points, I guess you could say, around locally is, I'll identify a field on satellite map imagery, go into Street View, figure out which like compass direction is the best view of that field, and make sure that the terrain is working in my favor. Hopefully there's a little bit of a downslope, so I can see a little bit further that I'm up on the hill and looking in the right direction. And then in the notes of the point, put facing northwest, for example, and then give a rough estimation for how many miles I can look out. And it's just a matter of kind of cataloging these little spots over time.
Exactly.
And yeah, and a lot of the time I find new ones every single chase I go out, and most of the time I'm going with my brother, so I'm able to kind of anticipate a little bit of ahead, and he's doing the driving portion and I can kind of nail down the next spot. And it's amazing how different of a strategy it is when it comes to the plains. And it's like, as getting out to the plains, it's like, dang, like this is kind of easy at this point. I mean, the storms are next level, I guess you could say. And there's a lot of other factors you got to take into consideration, but you're chasing the actual storm. You're not, maybe not chasing's the right word, but you're using the terrain points as your kind of track versus the storm itself, like you were saying.
Exactly. And it's an effective strategy for around here. Like I'm still able to see the storms for a significant amount of time. And but I will say I know the roads around Virginia very, very well. Like I can generally not even use maps while chasing anymore. I can just drive and get to where I need to go. I'll just have radar up instead of like using directions to find a navigational point or whatever. Right. Just because I've driven the roads so many times and it's kind of become a memory thing now. And I'm sure there are places if I chased enough in the plains that would become that way. But yeah, it's still pretty fun to just, oh yeah, I know there's a spot 20 minutes down the road and I'll see the storm from there.
Yeah, I'm getting to that point now. It's like I know Western Massachusetts like the back of my hand, but now I'm getting to know the Hudson Valley in New York and some of the farmlands out near the Finger Lakes a little bit better in New York. So it's slowly I'm growing this kind of mental map in my head of chaseable terrains and stuff. And even up in Western Vermont, where it was a particularly active area this year, which isn't a normal thing. I can't recall chasing Vermont too much, but there's a surprising amount of farmland in the Champlain Valley, fortunately. So, like I said, terrain can be your worst enemy, but you can also use it to your advantage, like we were saying, like with the mountains and stuff. And we get a lot of valley channeling here, which I believe there's a couple of academic papers on, and I imagine there's a lot of the same effect that takes place off the mountains, like you were saying, the foothills in Virginia there.
For sure. Yeah. I imagine there are some similarities, but I'll be honest that north of the White Mountains in Vermont is just, it's just an area I'm not familiar at all with. So, I mean, yeah, I'm constantly impressed by your success up there. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple of us up here that are wild enough to do it, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. But I imagine the storms up there kind of come out of Canada. So they'll mature in Canada and then run into your area.
It's a lot of, you're getting, the closed low over like, Quebec or Ontario, and then you're getting your fuel from the Great Lakes. It's pretty interesting how it works. It's almost like you get these lake effect systems, and 9 times out of 10, you're getting, a squall style storm that kind of rolls through, and you're kind of hunting for embedded segments.
Sure.
But you get your isolated supercell setups every once in a while. And there were a couple this year, but unfortunately they were just over the border in Canada that, there were a couple instances where we were looking at the models and it looked like, there were just going to be, supercells across upper New York and Vermont. I believe this was June 19th 19th, if I'm not mistaken, or June 30th. It was an enhanced day over Vermont, which is something you don't normally see. And
Right.
the models suggested that Vermont was going to be the place to be and the Champlain Valley was going to work out to our favor. But, the models trended about 200 miles south of what actually happened. So, yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of photogenic tornadoes in just outside of Montreal, which is not exactly what we were expecting. So, you got to take what you can get, I guess you could say. Shifting gears a little bit, I know you went to Virginia Tech, and I want to ask a little bit about your experience there and what you did in school and what it provided opportunities for you outside of, I guess you could say, storm chasing, or how much it's actually impacted your storm chasing career.
Sure. So I've done 6 years at Virginia Tech. I completed my undergraduate and my master's degree just this last May. So I will say it was awesome. I'm very glad to be done with school. But yeah, I mean, so I went in as a meteorology major. I didn't know anyone else going into college. I didn't have a high school community of anyone that did meteorology. So I really went in kind of blind and just said, I want to be a meteorologist. I'm gonna take that degree. And through the classes that I took and through the geography department at Virginia Tech, which is the one that offers the meteorology degree, I just met an amazing community of people. I was able to meet some upperclassmen and grad students who really coached me. And you might know their names now. People like Catherine Prosiv and Trevor White were there while I was at school, and they were the ones who began mentoring me and teaching me these things about storm chasing and meteorology. So having their influence was absolutely awesome. And just being able to sit down in a meteorology club meeting, or I saw my first tornado in the back of the Storm Cruiser, which is now a tour vehicle. And that really introduced me to like real storm chasing, going after tornadoes instead of going after the dark clouds in my backyard, kind of a thing. So, and then after a couple of years at school, I really kind of dug into the technical aspects of meteorology. You get into the math, you get into the thermodynamics, all that fun stuff. And I actually changed majors to geography, GIS, and ended up with a meteorology minor. But meteorology is so interesting because it's a geospatial discipline. Everything in meteorology has to have a spatial component. If you want to get technical, you could say that the thermodynamics are more of a mathematical, theoretical side of things. But really, effectively, meteorology, you have to deal with space and where things are and where things are going to be impacted and how people in those places are going to be impacted. And I really fell in love with the spatial component of that and analyzing the spatial component of that. And GIS and the technical side of geography lets me do that. And so Virginia Tech is a special program in that it all of geography and meteorology and GIS, it all falls under the same department. So the transition from meteorology to GIS was really seamless, and I was able to combine both of those disciplines super effectively through my entire education. And so going into my master's degree, that's exactly what I did. My master's degree is technically in geography, but it was very much a meteorological approach. I ended up studying an EF3 tornado that was enhanced by terrain interactions here in the Piedmont of Virginia. And that's really only possible through a combination of all three of those methods that I mentioned. So really, really unique perspective on meteorological education, which I'm super appreciative of. And of course, the professors and faculty there were just awesome. It's a young program at Virginia Tech, still fairly small. Like it can't compare in size to Oklahoma or Penn State. You know, the way they're cranking out awesome meteorologists, but there's a lot of people there, and it's a much smaller, tighter knit community here in Virginia. And Virginia Tech's the only school with meteorology in the region. And now I'm super good friends with a lot of my classmates, and we kind of have a lockdown on the chasing in the region. So it's the Virginia Tech squad that dominates the Mid-Atlantic storm chasing scene, and it's super awesome to know all these guys. And be supportive of each other's work and such.
That's awesome. And I really resonate with the tight knit aspect of a school and how much that can kind of shape your career path, I guess you could say, because my engineering school was a pretty young program as well, and a small tight knit school. Like my graduating class was 27, 28 students for mechanical
Wow.
engineering. So it's like we kind of went through everything together, and because of the small opportunities, or the small school, the opportunities, were kind of endless. You can kind of, go to your professors and say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, and they're there to kind of, help you facilitate that. So I imagine at Virginia Tech it's almost the same way, given that, your school, particularly in that geography or department of geography or school of
Mhm.
geography, whichever it may be, it's small enough to where you can kind of grow these opportunities, like you were saying, studying uh, the EF3 tornado that went through the Piedmont there. So really fascinating.
Yeah, it's a wonderful cross discipline kind of tight knit group of people. And you can walk the professor, like my severe weather meteorology professor is right next to my GIS professor. You can go ask him a question about the tornado, and then go ask him a question about the technical analysis of the GIS side of the tornado, and it's just awesome. So
Yeah. Now, what do you find is the biggest advantage that GIS brings to a meteorological context? Like in particular, like whether it be like through forecasting methods, or maybe even from a chasing perspective, where do you see like the best cross between uh, meteorology and like we talked about like the spatial components, but where maybe the future is going in terms of kind of enhancing how we understand the weather?
yeah, that is a good question, and is really deep, honestly. And there's so much you can do with GIS, and I'll give an example here. So I mentioned earlier the topographic enhancement of supercell thunderstorms here in Central Virginia, and from a GIS perspective, if you start from the GIS baseline, you can kind of look at the layout of the physiographic regions here in Virginia. And you have the Allegheny Highlands to the west, and then the Blue Ridge Mountains and Piedmont Coastal Plain, et cetera. And then you say, I have this data set of a cluster of supercells um, it rolls off of the highlands in West Virginia and then comes across the mountains. And if I plot all of those on a single plot, then there's this strip of enhanced reflectivity, enhanced rotation, deeper mesocyclones, everything right in the lee of the mountains. And I think from a purely meteorological perspective, you could say, well, maybe there's a correlation to a low pressure system or the Bermuda High off to the east, or some sort of blocking that comes off the Great Lakes or whatever. But if you include the GIS perspective in that, then you can start analyzing what's your terrain, what's your roughness, what's your aspect and slope, and all of these different things, and say, how does the geography of this region impact the individual mesoscale features that are happening in these supercell thunderstorms? So to approach that, and GIS offers a ton of tools. Like you can use coding for GIS. You can use these pre-built software done by Esri or open source or whatever. So if you have coding skills, you can do GIS. If you have software skills, you can do GIS. And if you know a little bit of meteorological data, like maybe how to download a NetCDF and drag and drop that into ArcGIS, then suddenly you have this whole world of analysis that's open to you. And I think you're starting to see I don't know if you would call it a resurgence or just people discovering this recently. But there are some people doing just amazing work with GIS. Like you see maps of these individual events. I know that people like Nicholas Isabella will put out maps of the verified storm reports and all the warnings for an outbreak in the Northeast, kind of a thing. And they're pulling that in with a little bit of code or a little bit of open source GIS and plotting it. And suddenly you can tell a meteorological story with it. So super powerful tools, and the possibilities are honestly endless. And you can go really deep into the analysis.
Yeah, I love quantifying data and like being able to visualize data. And particularly over geography, it's quite fascinating, like being able to kind of, implement like these color bars and kind of taking in this raw data and painting, these pretty complex pictures uh, to a point where it can be kind of understood by the general public, I guess you could say, in order to go like, okay, we'll use like the warning boxes versus confirm reports, for example. You can kind of follow the warning polygons up, and you go, okay, that storm was living for a while there, and it put down a number of tornadoes, or here was some flanking winds or something, and it's just really cool to see how you can kind of, like you said, paint this picture through all this data that you can kind of just implement into a map space, I guess you could say.
Exactly. So in terms of the verification example, how you verify storm warnings or whatever. So you could very, very easily approach this from a statistical standpoint or something and say, here's a percent value, here's a p-value of the verification score. How many warning polygons got it right, that kind of thing. Or you could just put it on the map and say, hey, look, we tornado warned this storm the whole way, and there's 15 tornado reports, and that looks like pretty good verification. So it's a very different approach, but a lot of people learn visually, I think. And so even recently, I posted a couple of maps of tornado warnings. Like there was tornado warnings in 2021, and then tornadoes and tornado warnings in December of 2021. And people really resonated with that, like a really simple visualization of just tornado warning polygons. But then you can pull a story out of that. You can pull, why are all the tornado warnings going in one direction? Why aren't there so many tornado warnings in Kansas and Oklahoma, and there's a whole bunch of Mississippi? And these are stories you can pull out. And all I did was post a map of the raw data. So that's super interesting. And you can go deep into the visualization stuff. I don't know if you've seen some of Evan Fisher's maps.
Oh, yes.
But his map, amazing visualizer. And he's using like snow totals and 3D blocks and like mountain ranges and just plastering meteorological data on it. And it looks amazing. And people love it. It's a really effective way of communicating this complex meteorological information.
Yeah. And I think like the future of it has kind of endless. And I imagine there's going to be eventually, who knows, some sort of 3D virtual reality component that you could probably implement into some fashion. And
it's getting close.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, there are projects right now that want to do photogrammetry on tornadoes and thunderstorms and mesocyclones, and just walk into a virtual model, 3-dimensional model of an actual mesocyclone. Like, this is just crazy.
Yeah. And it's, like you said, such a powerful communication tool. And I mean, because it's one thing just to, spill a bunch of meteorological jargon. Right. But when you paint this picture, it's something that, both people that are well versed in this stuff can grasp, as well as, kind of your general public, and kind of gather what they need to know about, okay, these are kind of maybe what expected threats are going to look like, or how an event broke down and why things happened the way they did. So, yeah, it's such a happy couple between meteorology and GIS. I'm glad we talked about that. Shifting gears a little bit again, photography is something that I know you're super passionate about, particularly with not only storm photography, but also astrophotography and nature photography in general. Where did the love of photography come from, and how did you kind of begin to hone your craft?
Yeah, so photography is a pretty recent thing for me. I knew I enjoyed, well, primarily, I love nature and the outdoors, and meteorology is just a very small part of that. I'm an avid hiker, absolutely love camping and being in nature and climbing mountains, and the natural world is just phenomenal. I want to spend as much time as I can in it. And so kind of through that, I was looking for ways to be artistic and expressive, because ultimately I'm an artist. I'm a musician and all these different things. And got my hands on a camera one day, bought myself a cheap entry-level Canon camera. I just started snapping pictures. And this was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now. And I started taking these pictures and was like, man, I love doing this, but why are my pictures so bad? Why do they, why do they look boring compared to these scenes that I'm seeing? I'm seeing it with my eyes. It can't be that hard to make the picture look like what my eyes are seeing, right? And so it was just a constant learning process for me, trying to figure out how, not only how does a camera work, but how does a photo work? How do you compose a photo? How do you turn it into not just what your eyes are seeing, but how do you turn that into a story? And every single photo needs to tell a story. And that was all just a self-taught process of just snapping as many pictures as I could, figuring out what worked, figuring out what didn't work. And then in terms of astrophotography, I was to the point, and I started astrophotography just over a year ago. I started it in December of 2019, I believe, or December of, I lost track of time. December of 2020. So I knew the basics of photography. I was pretty well into landscape at that point, already selling prints and all of that. And I found some YouTubers that talked about astrophotography, and they said it's something that takes a ton of patience, but you can put out these products that are just spectacular. Blew my mind, and I was like, well, new challenge, let's go learn it. And I sat down and taught myself astrophotography, and it took the full year. But and I have a little bit of specialized gear. You have to have a tracking mount, which tracks with the rotation of the Earth, so that your stars don't trail, basically streaks, because the sky does move. And but with that little bit of specialized gear, I was able to just adapt my landscape photography gear and turn it into astrophotography gear. And just slowly chipped away. And if you go back and look at some of my early astrophotography pictures, they're objectively not very good, but it was putting myself forward, being able to take those bad pictures and improve on them and figure out what I needed to do better to make the next photo better. And that's really my goal with all photography now, all artistic photography going forward, is I want every photo, every story that I tell to be more interesting than the last one.
That's a good way of looking at it, because I've had my fair share of attempts at astrophotography, and I can, pull it off to the point where I'm happy with it. I mean, I'm not trying to, I don't consider myself a photographer. So I know how to dial in some settings and kind of just set it up to the point of where I can get something but it's amazing, how much detail you can pull out by kind of, taking a little bit of patience and kind of, like you said, through a little bit of education and, just practice at the end of the day too, the results you can get out of it. Particularly some of the Milky Band shots and stuff like that are so,
right.
Fantastically beautiful. And for me, this past November, we had an aurora opportunity close to home, and I was just happy enough to, get as far north as I possibly could and try to snag some of it. And even then, it's like I zoom in after, even with 20-second exposures, I still get a little bit of the star trail going on, and it's like, and it's like, well, it's close enough to government work for what I'm doing, but some of your shots and the compositionally wise, there's something ornately beautiful about it, and I just wanted to credit you for some great shots. What would you give in terms of advice to someone that's starting to dabble in photography and looking to kind of progress towards more advanced levels?
Sure. So this goes for astrophotography and all different types of photography, storms and landscape and all of the above. But really what did it for me is I was able to just take a lot of pictures, and be willing to go out on that Thursday afternoon that you have free and go take pictures of what might be a fairly boring landscape, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work, what kind of light you need, get up at 5 a.m. for that sunrise, that kind of thing. Go take as many pictures as you can. And the improvement, it will come if you dedicate yourself and actively try to improve it. You will improve, which is really, really fun to watch. And It's a slow process, as most good things are, to really learn well. But taking lots of pictures, and from a technical standpoint, you need a way to store all those pictures. So you got to have some good organizational system, and then so that's the shooting photography side of it. Then there's a whole other side of editing, and how do you treat these raw files that you're getting from your camera, and trying to adjust them in a way that is reasonable, rational, and presentable to your audience, your desired audience. And that's a really tricky one because it's very, very subjective to edit a photo correctly. And again, that's something you just have to practice with a lot. I love the Adobe Lightroom Photoshop suite, and I spent a lot of time learning the technical details of how to use that. But there's other great software out there too. So it's really just battening the hatches down, picking a software, and learning how to edit your photos really well.
Awesome. Uh, Moving on, I want to ask you a couple, maybe some memories that you have from storm chasing. What is one of your personal favorite moments that you have from storm chasing? And or something that just sticks out to you. It doesn't have to be maybe the biggest event, but something that sticks out to you as one that is like a great personal success to you.
Sure. So I will say that my moments of biggest triumph are the ones that I look back on with the most fondness are pulling that random storm out of the middle of nowhere, and suddenly I'm on the storm of the day in like Eastern Virginia. Like, well, what the heck is an amazing storm doing out there? Back in June of 2020, there was a super marginal setup in Eastern Virginia, and me and my friend Drew Shearer, who's now doing grad school at Oklahoma University, good for him. We saw this, and it was like, oh, there's a little low pressure down near the Outer Banks, and it's just kind of spinning there. And the models say it wraps up like 3,000 Cape in the afternoon, but it's this tiny area of like 50 square miles in the swamp country. And we're like, well, this looks interesting. But the Storm Prediction Center, there wasn't even a general thunderstorm outlook for the area, and nobody was talking about it. We're like, boy, that's a 6-hour drive. Do we go down for this super marginal kind of just, are we imagining it? Like, what's going on? And we ended up pulling the trigger and driving I think it was actually 4 hours to get down to the target area. And sure enough, 3 supercells popped off the little cold front, warm front trip. You could call it a triple point, but it really was just kind of a little frontal boundary that was sitting there. And hopped on the supercell, and after we had started chasing the supercell, the SPC dropped a 2% tornado risk on exactly where we were. We're like, okay, this is a good sign. Drove up, got right underneath the mesocyclone, and the thing cranked out a tornado right in front of us. And it was a wonderfully photogenic tornado, and I have the picture hanging on my wall right now. And I mean, we were the only ones there. There it is, spinning in a field right in front of us. And, it's 2% tornado day. It was just an amazing experience that we were able to, drive from 200, 300 miles away and just pull this out. I'm pretty sure it was the only tornado in the country that day, maybe that week. And yeah, just an overall amazing experience. And that was something that wasn't terrain enhanced. It wasn't tropical enhanced. It was just this tiny little setup that was super fun to chase.
That's awesome. That's an incredible story. Now, do you have a story that maybe a big learning moment that you had that, a day you look back on maybe with some regret, and you go, man, if I had played my cards this way, maybe things would have turned out differently?
Yes. So I have learned some lessons about chasing in the mid-Atlantic. So actually, the day that I wrote my master's thesis on, I believe it was April 19th, 2019, the day of the EF3 Franklin County tornado. It was a moderate 15% hatched tornado day in Southern Virginia, Central North Carolina, et cetera. Big high shear low cape day. There was like 90 knots of shear with like 700 SRH and like 1,000 cape, kind of a gig, right? And we were like, okay, big storm chase day. We're all going to get out there in the afternoon and chase these tornadoes. And then at 9 o'clock in the morning, a supercell popped up in central North Carolina and tracked north into Virginia. And this lone warm sector supercell didn't have any frontal forcing with it, ended up producing the EF3 tornado in Franklin County. And I'm sitting on the wrong side of the mountains thinking, I've got to get out to this storm. So I drove out through Roanoke, through the mountain pass to get in front of the storm. But by the time I got to the storm, the tornado had already lifted. And in fact, the radar presentation was complete garbage. By the time I got there, the storm had lost all of its rotation on radar. The reflectivity had gone down. The equitops had gone down. I was like, man, I missed the show. I'll have to wait it out for the afternoon frontal forcing that's going to come through later. And so I'm sitting there on the side of the highway watching this dead storm kind of roll past me. And I hopped out of the car and I was doing a Facebook live stream at the time. And I kind of look up and go, I think it's rotating pretty close to me. That's interesting. I better start recording video. And all of a sudden, that rotation intensified and it dropped a tornado right next to me, right in the trees next to me. So I dove into my car and hunkered down, my hands on my head, like hoping that this tornado wouldn't hit me. And fortunately, it passed about 100, 150 yards behind my car. Didn't catch it on video. Huge bummer. My camera was pointed in the wrong direction. But it's generally not a good thing when a tornado passes behind you and you're sitting in a location like that. And that shook me up pretty good. It was I had done everything right in quotation marks. Got underneath the updraft region of the storm and was watching it visually and all this stuff. But the radar presentation had lulled me into not taking it seriously. And rotation on this storm did not show up until after the tornado had lifted. That's how fast it happened. And it was confirmed EF1 tornado, tore up a few buildings. And so that really taught me to trust your eyes and trust your meteorological knowledge more so than just chase radar, because it can be deceptive, especially when terrain is involved. Like the radar beam could have been blocked by one of the 4,000 foot mountains that was in the area, right? Or the storm process was happening so quickly. And this was a warm sector, open air supercell and in a 700 SRH environment. So meteorologically speaking, that has potential to go tornadic very quickly. So that was a good lesson to learn. Fortunately, I was safe and it was a weak tornado and nothing came of it. But I ended up seeing several more tornadoes that day. All of those were done safely and correctly. But that's something that's always floating around in the back of my mind now when I chase these high shear, low cape thunderstorm events in Virginia. The storms are tracking at 70 miles an hour and they can spin up a tornado in seconds. So your approach to that is very different than a storm that's moving at 20 knots in the middle of the summer.
Yeah, that's a powerful story because, after you do this for a number of years, you can almost lull yourself into kind of a sense of security saying, I know what I'm doing, but it only takes an event like that to kind of, bring you back to earth. And fortunately, like you said, it didn't impact you directly, but, if you're like you said, 150, 200 yards down the road, that tornado's barreling right over you. And who knows, you could lose a windshield or something along the lines of that, maybe even flip the car. We've seen how powerful some of those real tight suction vortices can be. So it's important that we don't allow ourselves as chasers to kind of, get to a point of where we are at, complete confidence and almost we should always have this layer of, respect and boundary, I guess you could say, when it comes to Mother Nature, because like you said, it can kind of come back and bite you the moment you let your guard down.
Right. And especially here in Virginia, the tornado producing events, the quote dangerous events around here are these high shear, low cape events, and you'll get the storms moving so fast, and they're rain wrapped 90% of the time. And those are conditions that are more similar to what you'd find in Dixie Alley, right? The tall trees and the fast moving storms and the low visibility, all of those things. So it really, and I have huge respect for the guys that chase down south and do so amazingly successfully, because it's another level of, you just gotta respect the storms, respect the setup, all of those different things.
Yeah. With that, Peter, I want to ask, where do you have places online that people can find you at? And, what are you doing anytime in the near future that people may look forward to when it comes to those kind of things? I know you have a YouTube channel as well as your socials. So I want to give you the opportunity to plug those.
Cool. Yeah. I'd say my most active platform is definitely my Twitter at Forecaster25. Happens to be a play on my last name. But I have a ton of fun on Twitter, and it's just an awesome community there. And I'll put out my maps occasionally. I'll put out the forecast maps or the GIS stuff that I talk about. Will all go on there. And my photography, I'll post most of my pictures on there. Astrophotography, landscape photography, or the storms whenever the storms come around. So definitely check out my Twitter. It's a ton of fun. I also have a Facebook page, actually a couple of Facebook pages, Peter Forister Photography, where I'll just post all of my photos. And then Nova Storm Chasing, which is kind of the community of storm chasers that we have here in Virginia. And it's just the best storm chase content you'll find in the Mid-Atlantic, a collection of videos and photos from around here, and the best chasers in the Atlantic too. So, and then let's see, I have a photo store. If you'd like to help support some of my photography stuff, all of the profits I make from photo prints will go towards more photography gear, or maybe a little bit of gas money. And that is darkroom.tech. It's forecaster25.darkroom.tech, I believe. And all of those are linked in my bios and Linktree and such. And I'd say YouTube, trying to upload more there too. So.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the June 1st podcast. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And also, I want to wish you luck when it comes to the snow event coming later this weekend. Should be a good time, hopefully, and especially at those higher elevations. I'm not sure where my mixing line is going to exactly set up. I'm sure I'm going to get some kind of depressing rain at some point once the low kind of moves over and things turn wet. So who knows, maybe I'll get a little bit of snow, but I'll be looking forward to seeing the deluge of snow in those upper elevations.
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. It's been totally awesome, and I wish you the best of luck in growing this. It's a super cool project, so I'm sure you're going to do awesome.
All right, and with that, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.